Hello, everyone. Anyone. This today's episode, number 18, chapter 18. It's entitled The Fall. It's gonna be a big one. This is, according to some, exactly what happened. For this one especially, I wanted to follow along and get as much correct as I could. So, without further ado, and for the absolute chaos that is this probably accurate historical event, chapter 18. The Fall. Fall. April 21st, 1042. The city burned. The people rose against their emperor with great fury. In response, the protection of the city had been put into the hands of a commander of the army named Constantine. With the guards and large contingent of Varangian, he managed to hold the rioters from the palace. The revolt had been going strong, and the city guard had been beaten back for the day. It had turned into something of a siege. Then a retinue of Varangian came and rallied the guard's position, having to cut their way through the mob to get there. The war for the city raged, and Fitbjorn sat on the sand of the harbor by the ships that could ferry him away at a moment, drinking fruit juice from a cup. The commander was imprisoned, languishing. It had happened 2 days past, and still he didn't know what should be done. He was, after all, not a guard of the city. He would be allowed the authority to pick up a weapon and defend with the other Varangian, but he wasn't presently being ordered to do so. With Harold in his cell, the command structure of the Varangian was a mess. There were some few among the guards who were organizing and delegating, but their orders meant only as much as their personal relationship to the men they ordered. If they didn't know each other, they didn't feel an overwhelming urge to comply with the command. And the emperor had ordered their leader arrested brazenly in the street, after sending assassins after him. Fitzbjorn and the rest of the Varangian would be more worried for their state, still being in the city, were it not for the uprisings that were going on around every street. Everyone was currently in a popular revolt, and no one had time to try and wrest power from the only force with enough men and strength to keep the city from burning. The emperor had put himself into an extremely precarious position, as among his first acts as emperor. White Bear! Niels approached him and sat in the sand with him, enjoying the sun. Fitbjorn inhaled the scents of the salt water and the tarred decking. He wore a simple tunic over his breeches and was the picture of relaxation now. And the sand, trying to. He looked down into the cup. Mead! Niels asked enthusiastically, coming closer. Orange. Remember from them from Sicily. You kept oranges from our time in Sicily. That was years ago. Fitbjorn looked at him. No. I got this at the market. The oranges were from Sicily. Ah, I see now what you mean. Care to join in with this rioting? Fitbjorn took another drink. This is not my city. I have nothing to revolt for. The jailing of the commander, is it not enough? Is that what they revolt for now? He asked, genuinely surprised, and snorted a short laugh. Of course not, no. I'm sure many don't even know. It is rather the treatment of the empress they riot for. I hear, according to many, she was shaved like a common whore and sent to some island to be a monk. Fitbjorn furrowed his brow. Who shaves a horse? What nonsense is that? Huh. That is a fair point you make, White Bear. That is just what was said. But now you say it, whores usually have long, gorgeous hair. How many whores have you? Shut up. You have seen them as well as I have. I think I have partaken in more than you have, though. I have not had a woman in too long. His mind drifted to the woman Gertrude, the great beauty that he somehow had not seen once since that morning. She might have been a ghost, or not ever there at all. Who he could not say. Years? Asked Niels sympathetically. Fitzbjorn looked at him. Months. Oh, he lied. What are we doing here, Niels? We should get the hell away from this city. We wait for a time to free Harold. If we abandoned him here now, he'd be killed. And I wouldn't be the one to do it. Fitzbjorn realized. We must use this chaos then. How long ago was the Emperor sent away? Some days ago. The rioting started almost immediately, but the Emperor's reign is not so stable now with this. The sounds of the people's cries continued to howl behind them. Are the Varangian also rioting with them? Some are. They're where there is a fight to be had. You know them. So Hafald has personally wrestled half the city guard into submission. Niels laughed. Must be. She's back, yelled a voice. They both turned. What? Asked Niels. It was Ragnar who'd come to find them. The Empress. She's back. What? I heard she was gone. Where the hell was she sent? Down the road? No. To an island monastery or nunnery or something. Near enough that she were brought back in due course for the rioting. I hear she's already given a talk to the folk about the palace, asking them nice to calm themselves. Ragnar's excitement was palpable. Ragnar, why do you care so much? She's a good Christian woman, Empress no less. She is a well-loved beacon of piety in the lands. Oh, I see now, Niels said. I thought it was a curious thing, you loving so a Greek ruler. Ragnar laughed. I didn't think she's a ruler no longer. The rioters are still about their business too, despite her pleading. She gave a whole talk from the balcony of the palace, but they were nae swayed. Probably all put on by the king there, you ken. I think the sight of her were enough to inflame the fighting stronger than the Emperor thought it would. Fitzbjorn started. Sounds like this may be our chance to rescue out the commander. He stood and turned. Where are the Varangian? Either at the palace with the rest of the rioters, or out doing what they will, Ragnar said with a shrug. We need to put on our armor. The time has come to bring the raid to the palace. Niels stood from the sand, excited. Yes, to the barracks, and gather every Northman we see on the way. Ragnar started to nod. Aye, I'll on to Kinnipus. Be both you careful. There is still threat hiding under these people. The Emperor's assassins could be everywhere. Go now! Fitzbjorn had his mighty axe with him, as he always did, and his shoulder-covering half-cloak of the white bear skin. His armor, however, was in the barracks, and he'd need to go collect it. There was work to be done today, and for that he thanked the gods. The three of them walked in a formation, and with Fitzbjorn at the front. Niels and Ragnar were not as big as Fitzbjorn was, but no Varangian were small, particularly not compared to the local peoples. With their postures threatening and their stride intent, they walked with power and determination. Numerous times, from passing through the gate from the harbor, they came across people who paused and looked at them as if trying to assess a target, and always shied away. Ragnar looked on with menace under his red-brown beard, and Niels beneath his blond one. Fitzbjorn did not look about in a snarl. He rather held a face of impassive control. He looked at the people with flames and blades in hand and was unconcerned. Of course, they all had weapons in hand, which aided in the effect. The people who raged in the street managed to make space for the three warriors as they made for the palace. There were a few times when one accidentally stumbled into their path, but they were gently guided out of the way. It really felt like the city was burning. Many of the rioters were drinking openly in the daylight, and many things were aflame. There were pyres in the streets as the great upheaval continued. Miklagard burned, and so it felt like Rome did with it. Eifert, to us, here! Niels called, and the man turned, with the 5 more with him walking over and all falling into pattern behind them, without direction. Through the streets they thus marched, gathering many more Varangian warriors with them. They found Bodil and the Inga with Hafald. Then they found Olaf and Harold, who leaned on his friend to come. Together, this gathered army wound their way beyond the citizens and toward the palace. And when there they found it a hive of activity, with the mob gathered out in front of the gates. The doors were closed, and there were guards on the parapets with arrows pointed down. A man at the top of the wall was yelling something that went completely unheard by the clamorous crowd below. "What the hell are the odds we get in that way?" asked Bodil. "No chance, I would say. We should go to the other door. The guards will probably let us in," Fitbjorn responded. Laboriously, they made their way around the rabble and slid along the wall in a single line to the heavy door that led straight into the halls from the street. Fitbjorn knocked heavily with his fist. "Open!" he called, then turned back. "Does anyone speak this Greek?" Then the door opened. Fitbjorn hadn't noticed, but there was an eye slit that opened, and a man had peered through to see them. They all looked into this open door to see the large frame of a Varangian in full armor standing there. "Håkon," Fitbjorn said, "I am sad to tell you, White Bear, but I do not speak Greek." He laughed under his helmet and retreated into the palace halls, and all the Varangian followed him in. "Where is the commander being held?" "The tower of the prison. He is held in the top there." "I will bring you. Ready your weapons, for it is nearer the harbor than here." "We will go there, but first we need to go to the barracks. These warriors need armor and weapons for what is to come." Håkon nodded. "Of course, you know where that is then. Go, and I will see what I can do to gather more of us. Go, brother. Hail! Hail!" They all yelled and rushed through the halls to the barracks. The people within the palace were all of them terrified by the swell of hulking, pale-skinned warriors rushing about, and stayed in their rooms, out of the way. They were stopped but once by a troop of Roman imperial guards, but those who spoke the tongue among them explained they went only to get weapons and armor to assist the rioting outside. The Varangian were, of course, well known, sworn protectors of the emperor, and thus permitted to pass without trouble. From outside, there then came a crying din of such proportion it could be nothing but the front grate being overcome, and the guards there overwhelmed. All at once it sounded like a bang in the night. The Varangian in the barracks were all still in the process of putting their armor on, and all but one paused and looked to where the sound originated, through the wall. "That, I think, is not a good sign," Niels said. He'd pulled on heavy trousers and was belting on the plates of leg armor at that moment. Fitbjorn hadn't paused a moment in his strapping on the armor. There was no time. "What the fuck are you waiting for?" he asked sternly. "Hurry your arming. Guards who are ready to the door. Be ready. Do not think that this is a bad thing, though." They who heard this last looked at him in astonishment. "Do you not?" "The palace is about to be fucking burned down," Harold said. "Aye, but that mob is not coming after us. Keep arming yourselves. We go for the commander when we are done this." Fitbjorn shrugged into his long quilted gambeson, and then put his hands up to let the chainmail shirt fall onto him, his head fitting through the neck easily. Then he put the nasal helm with the bolted-in chain skirt onto it, the aventail, on. He rocked his head side to side, feeling the weight teeter around. All the gear the Varangian wore was of finest quality, and much of it bore rare metals and jewels from their many raids and campaigns. He picked up then a large blue and white kite shield, the design being much preferred them over that of the more traditional Nordic round shield. "Now then," he paused as he saw the men at the door holding weapons out to the left side. They started to shout. Fitbjorn grunted loud and dashed to the door, Once out into the hall, he turned to the left and sprinted into the danger there, the others having no choice but to follow his wildness. 4 guards of Miklegard were pointing weapons and demanding something in their Greek, and the white bear slammed into them, knocking them back in the confines of the hallway. The men behind him ran forth after him and stabbed with their long falchions to finish the work. "You are a madman," Håkon said. Fitbjorn turned on him, eyes ablaze with wild wrath. "Why did you kill these men? Terrible of aspect and unstoppable of will. We fight!" His great axe was around his neck, supported by the leather strap, and he drew the sword from across his body. Behind Håkon, the other Varangians started to spill out of the room to see what had happened, but they were all full armored and ready to fight. Seeing this, Fitbjorn turned and led the charge to the courtyard aft the main gates. He rounded out into the place, the sounds of war raging in his ears. Beyond this doorway, and by the gate, there were men bracing the arrival of the riotous mob who pressed further on them. It was all chaos, unnavigable chaos. "Should we go around them?" asked a woman's voice at his ear. "Yes, we cut back to the door to the street. This fight is useless here. Let the guard deal with them." They turned and went back toward the hall, the street door, and poured out into the city. They made their way for the prison, where was held the commander, and avoided fighting as much as they could, though altogether was impossible. Where they met resistance, they destroyed it and moved on. The shield wall pressed against the rioters on all sides through the city, and the Varangian pushed. "There it is," Niels said, finally sighting the building. A wave of relief washed through them as they saw it. Though fewer of the people were interacting with them, given their state of arm and aggression, they fought their way to the prison and approached some guards who still protected the door. "The towers here, is this it?" asked Olaf, completely disregarding the guards there posted. "It is. We need to make a perimeter and protect this place while we try and batter down the door," Fitbjorn said. He then made for the door, and the guards held up pikes to slow his way. He regarded them with surprise. "I don't think they believe we are on their side," Bodil said. "Get them out of my way. I don't think they need to die, though," Fitbjorn ordered, and the men were attacked from either side. They tried to protect against the shields coming at them, but they could make no effective defense and were dealt with easily. Each was disarmed and beaten and dragged to a nearby alley where they could sleep off their pounding in some relative peace. Fitbjorn knocked loudly at the door with the butt of his axe. "Commander!" called Niels. "Commander, we have come to rescue you!" He put an ear against the door. There was no response. "Halder! Ulf! Can you hear us?" asked Ragnar loudly, though not reaching the same resonance that Niels had. There was still no answer. "They could be unconscious," Inga said. "What if they were beaten? What if they need healing?" The idea unnerved enough of them to start kicking at the door. "Use the axe, White Bear," Hafvald said. They exchanged a look. I'll get it open," he replied reluctantly. Fitbjorn took a step back, and space was made for him, and he started to chop at the wooden door with mighty swings. The door was of solid wood, though, and soon he tired of the laborious strikes. "Come, Hafvald, carry on for me." "I fear my arm would break the haft against the door here," Hafvald said, hesitating. "The haft is made from a branch of Yggdrasil, and you are not so much stronger than me, I think. Go now." He took the axe and started to beat down the door with his great strength. "What do we do next, traitor?" asked a man with a spear who watched the work. "When we have the commander freed with us, we go for the harbor, unmoor the ship, and get the hell out of the city. Whereafter, I think, will be his decision, but we need to go. That is wise counsel. I'm ready to quit this stinking place anyway." The door was broken in, and Ragnar went in with 3 others to help the potentially infirm commander. Hafvald leaned on the axe and panted. "He's gone," Ragnar's familiar voice said. "There's nae anybody in the cells here." Many of the Varangian looked about crestfallen. They must have moved him somewhere. Where the hell could he be? Could he be executed already? Nope, there's no way. We'd know. Well, we need to go in and search him now. The voices all shouted over each other, trying to gain the greater influence through the sheer volume. Hold! Came a voice from down the street. They who looked that way lowered their weapons in surprise and trapped attention. Hold all that raucous yelling! All looked at the man who walked from the corner with his two companions. That's not possible, Håkon said. Fitbjorn groaned. He'd not turned, but he knew that voice. Of course the gods would save him, he said, shaking his head. Didn't I tell you that my brother Olaf said I was protected? Harald Sigurdsson said as he walked the street toward them with his hands to the sides in demonstration of his, in fact, presence. Lord, how did you get out? Asked Olaf. That shall be a story for another time. I'll have Theodor foretell it, I think. For now I need to know what is happening. The people are rising against Michael the Emperor, one woman said excitedly. He smiled at her. Blessed news it is indeed, he said with glee. He looked around at his dangerous wolves and the bears. Get me my fucking armor! Aye, came the response. Harold looked around. How many are here? Knut, how many? Some hundreds, Lord. I am not sure of how many exactly. Harold nodded and thought. I need a full score of 20 to go to the harbor. Get ready the longships. I do not foresee this being as forgivable the Lord would command. Another 20, go to the bank room. Get together as much of my fucking loot as possible and bring it to the ships. Everyone else with me. Once I'm armored, we're going. Everyone looked on him with expectant excitement. He loved that feeling. We're going on a fucking rampage through Mecklegard. Who? They all sung together and ran to do as they were bid. To the ships with us? Asked Ragnar. No. We go with the commander. He looked over and locked eyes with Harold. The man nodded, and he nodded back. To the armory. We need to get back to the palace. I wanted to go to the bank store, Olaf said. You know, you wouldn't get to keep any of it, right? Bodil said. Just what you already have. I know. It's still nice to touch. They all laughed. Come on, you fighters of mine with me, Harold ordered, and then ran past them and down the hall. Shields, he ordered from the last man in the line and was handed a large raindrop shield. He hefted it in his left arm and cracked his neck. With Harold at the front and his men behind, he raced down the street, back toward the palace. Those behind him harboring some small concern for his lack of armor being at the front, but knowing not to question him. There, on the other way, however, they found that here was relatively and blessedly quiet. The fighting seemed to have continued to localize toward the palace where Constantine would be organizing a vicious resistance to the revolting populace. They still trotted through the streets at a measured pace to not run headlong into a fight and accidentally flank themselves. Harold and his men arrived at the back of the mob who stood before the palace gates. Those who looked back reasoned that these Varangian were more of the emperor's men and panicked at the sight, knowing themselves to be now surrounded. Harold only put up a hand of warding, which somehow calmed them as intended. Shields together! I need to stand tall here. There was some small managing of the effort, but eventually 4 men supported the commander between them on a shield, and this procession walked through the crowd who parted for them reverently. When they arrived at the front, many of those who protected the palace gate looked at the strange sight of the remaining Varangian melting through and from the rabble to form a solid unit. The rank in front of them stood in hesitation, unsure what to do with what with who they saw before them. Harold's imprisonment was well known through the city. It seemed almost miraculous for him to be standing proud and tall among his own army before them. "Varangian!" he shouted loudly. "To me!" The moment that passed next was the quietest and longest anyone present had ever experienced. "Hail!" said one, and he broke from the gathered army and went to stand with Harold. A flood of northern warriors walked with him at the same time and stood with the army of the rioters against the city guard. Soon enough, all those who called themselves Varangians stood with Harold and faced the gate they had just been protecting. Harold took in a deep breath, aware that everything here hinged on his actions and words. "Take the palace," he said loud and with certainty, and the army marched forth in frightening uniformity and with a relentlessness that drove many of the guards to flee. The gate fell, the courtyard thereafter, the palace was next. They came back to the armory without running into any more guards, and all held watch as the commander donned his armor. The breeches and tunic and boots, then the composite three-part chain shirt that had a skirt reaching to his mid-thigh. Finally, Harold wrapped a heavy red cloak around his shoulders and clasped it with the cross-circlet brooch. Lapped in his fine armor and regal war cloak, Harold exhaled a long, breathy growl. "And then there is this," he said, lifting an ornate dagger from the table. The dagger blade was long as his forearm, and the pommel was crudely cut diamond. The handle was inlaid with silver and gold filigree. The whole thing shone of opulent and needless wealth. "The Emperor's knife," he said, "a gift from the last Michael to sit upon the throne here, and my gift for the next one." He marveled at the weapon. "What is that metal? I think I have never seen such a thing in my life." All now looked to the knife that Harold held. The overlapping ripple patterned into the blade, making it look no less than magic. "Damascene," Harold said reverently. "This is the lost magic of Damascus steel, the greatest of all metals upon Midgard." He sheathed it across his front, below his belly, and stood tall. "Lord, your helmet," offered Canute. "This isn't a battle. This is a different fight entirely. Bring it with you, and if the need comes, I'll put it on. I told you all, did I not? St. Olaf came to me in a vision. My half-brother said to me that he would guide and protect me. This is the miracle of King Olaf we'll witness." "How did you escape your cell?" asked Thjoldarfr. "This is need to know." "That, I said, I would tell you another time. Not now. Not now. While still in this miracle do we all act. We go for the throne room." He lifted again the shield and turned to the door. The Varangian force behind him all turned and went out the door into the chaos that raged through the palace. Through the halls, they came across another group of Varangian. These all held a chest in their arms and wore some precious accoutrement about their heads. "You look like you're looting the smoldering ruins of an empire," Harold said to general, excited laughter. "How strange it is that we look exactly like what we are," said Sven, a man to rival Hafald's size. "How much more is there in the store?" "Much. There is plenty much left that we have not the hands for," the man reported grimly. "Olaf!" Harold ordered. Olaf's eyes widened and his shoulders broadened. "Yes, Lord," he said. "Take 10 men and go to the storeroom." He looked back at the men. "You have the healthy greed of a dragon and the cunning eye of a dwarf for the fine metals and glimmering jewel." "I do," Olaf agreed. They who heard laughed with this. "Go and plunder the kingdom, my friend." Harold slapped Olaf on the chest. "Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord!" he near shouted with excitement. Fitbjorn rolled his eyes. Olaf went off to the best work he'd ever been ordered to do, and the rest ran in the other direction to make for the throne room. But a notch of frustration extended claws into Harold's belly as they approached the room and saw that there were no guards posted there. They entered the grand chamber then and saw that it was empty and destroyed. The grand ornate windows were smashed, the glass upon the floor. The finery of gold, the tapestries, and the silks were all of them taken. There was blood on the floor. That son of a bitch had better not be dead, Harold shouted into the room, the reverberation carrying his bellow all about them. Search the alcoves, the sides rooms, find me anyone, he continued in his angry tirade. Harold stepped through the room and walked up to the steps of the dais to the throne. He stood sneering at it a moment. He looked down at the place he had kneeled before the emperor, then spat there. He climbed up onto the throne and stood where the emperor had sat. I would shit here if I had to, he said quietly. Lord, we found the one! Harold turned to see what came of their shouting, and saw that 5 of his men carried the interpreter and adviser, Glengar, with them, the man Harold hated almost as much as he did the 5th. Glengar was blubbering and squealing as he saw he was being dragged to the commander of the Varangian. Harold, for his part, looked on the man with a grimness in his expression that held no mercy. He was thrust to his knees cruelly before the dais. No, Harold said, before the throne. They picked him up by the shoulders and carried the man up the steps and put him to kneeling before Harold, who sat on the throne. He mulled over the idea of torturing his hated foe for a moment. I don't even need to, he said, seeing the man's pathetic, whimpering face. Where is he? He asked in Greek. He has gone to a monastery, please, he sputtered in inconsolable fear. Harold reveled a moment in the utter power he felt over the pitiful creature. What fucking monastery? He roared like a wild lion. He knew the sound of a man who thought he could contend with his own fear. Such a state needed only a powerful reminder that this was impossible. The Studian, St. John's Monastery, he whimpered. Harold leaned back and spent another agonizing moment looking at the man. Good! Kill him! Halfald raised up his large sword and swung down, cutting the head from the man. Some of the blood spattered onto Harold's face. It burned hot. It was life. It was death. He grinned. That is the best feeling I have had in a long time. He sighed contentedly. We are not done, though. The monastery of St. John, the Studian. Who knows it? I do, Ragnar said. I've tithed there afore. Harold grinned again. That is some good Christian charity. Now let us go get recompense for the payment. How far? Far. Near the Golden Gate, Lord. The ships are far nearer. I don't fucking care how damn far it is. He looked around at the horde of Vikings at his command and laughed. We're raiding a monastery. Once more, through the street did they rage, cutting down any who dared to stand before them without compunction. He knew the looters' work was being carried out well, and they'd carried what goods they could to the ships. Those galleys should be readied and awaited Harold and the rest if they did decide to quit Miklagard this day. No moment would make for a better opportunity to flee the city but for that exact moment after leaving the palace, and yet Harold would not be resisted. He stalked toward his goal without a second thought spared anywhere. They came to the doors of the monastery, and the Varangian threw them both open. Then in walked Harold. He walked boldly to the front, at the front of his army, his men and women pouring in on the sides and rushing through the place that could be used to hide. Of this there was little need, for he was there by the altar, kneeling and praying in a quivering voice. "O Emperor!" Harold called. "Michael the Fifth! O liege lord, Roman a man!" The man ceased his whimpering and turned in horror to see Harold. You, I am done as emperor, please. Harold laughed with such satisfied delight. Renouncing title? Abjuring your duty? Abdicating? No normal title. Emperor? No, not emperor. I don't want it. Please, you can be emperor. I just want to be a monk. I will go to a monastery. Harold stalked toward the man at the altar. Get fuck out my way, he blustered as he pushed the man aside. Harold knelt at the altar. Oh, how are the outsides and the rooms? He asked in Norse. All is safe, Lord. As God wills. I think I will make for him a sacrifice. Dear God, my Lord and the Protector, hear my prayers. Help me to forgive, Lord, and receive this sacrifice with open arms and love. Know my power. He stood then and crossed himself. Then Harold slowly pulled the knife from its sheath across his belly and held it in front of him over the altar. He nodded to himself. The emperor looked up and saw the knife and the impassive face of the Viking who looked straight ahead at the wall beyond them. His expression darkened to abject, unreasonable horror. What are you doing? Please don't kill me! The man sniffled. I would not kill the emperor, Harold said without emotion. He then lunged into violent action and grabbed the man by the scruff of his robe. He wore still the finery of an emperor, and so Harold knew he'd relinquished nothing. Being careful with the knife, he pulled the robe up to Michael's waist and cut free the belt that held the trousers up. No, 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 no! Michael screamed. Harold continued and ripped the trousers down until he stood and held the man like he was about to spank an errant child. He lifted his foot and stepped down the man's back, pushing him down to the ground. The emperor managed to croak out one more, no, and then Harold knelt down, putting his knee into the man's back cruelly. He mused a moment on the thought of kneeling for the man one last time, but said nothing. With his left hand, he grabbed the man's penis and testicles, and then with one stroke brought the knife under them and sliced up. Harold Sigurdsson cut the balls off Emperor Michael V. He threw the handful onto the altar and grabbed the man's robe again. Michael moaning in the shock and pain. Harold then dragged the emperor from the sanctuary and put out into the street where many onlookers had come to see the spectacle of the whole host of Varangians standing by a monastery. Harold threw the man down, the emperor's hands still between his legs to stop the bleeding. Michael now started to scream as he was brought out into the sun. Harold held high the knife and turned the man's face to him. He leaned down and put his head to the emperor's and whispered something to him that his men did not hear. Once he'd stood back in full height, he grabbed Michael by the back of his hair and worked his knife into one eye and then the next, cutting them both out of his head. Harold stood there, knife in hand, over the former emperor who clutched at his face and shrieked in disbelieving agony and rage. The crowd looked on in stunned silence. None could speak for what they saw. Even the gathered Varangian guard all stayed quiet for the horrid violence done there. Harold wiped the blade on the man's robes until it was cleaned of his blood and sheathed it, and then left the wailing man, walking back into Miklagard. Apparently, it's a true story. As I've mentioned before, reading through the saga of Harold Sigurdsson and reading that segment, being like, "What are you talking about? How has no one told this story yet? Did that happen? Really?" Some claim that it happened. I like the version where it happened. A Viking, future Viking king, cut the balls off and out of the Emperor of Rome. That is madness. It's nonsense. That's just amazing to me. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. And today, while I'm recording this, is October the 9th, so happy Leif Erikson Day. And because I can't really help myself, Hinga Dinga Durgan